Hi, I'm John Wolpert, and I'm here to have our breakout session on the Baseline Protocol, and we can talk about how that works with Chainlink and with other systems. And we're going to have hopefully a lot of Q&A. So get those questions coming. I'll start with some basic information about what the Baseline Protocol is, how to find it. I'm not going to put up any slides or anything today. I'm going to just talk to you. And so it'd be great to have as much of a conversation as we can. So definitely get those questions coming. I think Dustin, you're gonna find me some questions to answer. Yep.
Absolutely.
Right on. Can they hear you? Yeah, they can hear you. Awesome. Okay. So the Baseline Protocol is, for those of you who don't know, is the new emerging industry standard for how to use public blockchain in particular as in a safe and effective way for companies to stay in sync with their traditional systems of record. So if anybody out there is a distributed systems person or a traditional IT person, you know that if I have a machine over here and I have a machine over there, if I want those machines to work together effectively, if I want a thing over here to be in sync with thing over here, if they need to be verifiably identical, and as they change, as the state changes, they change together or in the right order according to the right rules and shared rules, then you need some common frame of reference. Either an integration bus, or you can make one primary and the other will follow it. And in general, we've been dealing with that kind of issue for really for as long as we've been networking computers. The internet, of course, scales because it doesn't have to worry about that. It does not maintain state. You can pass packets between routers and they go all over the place, and one router doesn't have to remember what packets it was pushing through, and it doesn't have to coordinate its state with other routers, really. Largely, I mean, there's DNS and some things, but state gets tricky when it comes to scaling, and we see this in blockchain, right? A blockchain is, a wonky term for that is a singleton. It's a replicated singleton. Lots of machines trying to maintain state on a single set of information. Dustin, am I getting too wonky on people?
I don't think so.
All right. Just want to be sure. I don't want to lose anybody. So from that perspective, it's really boring. This is what we say boring after 5 years of hyperbole about enterprise blockchain. Boring is the new exciting. So this is sort of an excitingly boring thing in that it's practical. It works. And it doesn't violate some basic principles of information security for companies that need to not let their competitors know what they're doing sometimes, and not reveal private information of their customers, and also not do things like invest in stuff and then be able to let people be able to know that what their positions are, right? In the disruption community, we worry about this less, but I think even in the community that's saying, hey, let's do new blockchain-y things, at some point you kind of wake up and go, wait a minute, people who shouldn't know what my wealth is can figure it out. Hey, I invested in this token, or I traded this token, and somebody figured out that was me, and now they're tracing where I've gone all over the place. These are worrisome things. So when you're trying to maintain state on a piece of information across multiple machines, it gets tricky, and especially when you're trying to maintain state on shared information across companies. So if you and I are, you're my customer, or we're partners, or I'm your customer, or you're my auditor. There's information in my databases that I maintain internally, not on a blockchain. There's lots of information that should not go on blockchains. As I often say, blockchains are digital nudist colonies, right? That the difference between a private blockchain and a public blockchain is simply, the public blockchain's on a public beach and the private blockchain's on the private beach. But if you have access to that beach, you get to see everything. That could be a problem, right? If you're and this is why I'm not a big fan of private blockchains certainly anymore, because it's not a very good design pattern. If you're the reason you went away from public blockchain to private blockchain is that you wanted to put information on a blockchain, your confidential data on a blockchain, whether it was encrypted or not. Nobody really cares. Encryption is just a matter of time before somebody hacks it. So companies need to be able to control both access to and the encryption of their data. So it's not sufficient to say, hey, I'm going to put my data out there in public most of the time, and I'll just encrypt it. You also have to control access to it. Access control lists. That's what traditional databases and systems of record do. They say, hey, you're authorized to access this set of memory locations. And then also it will be encrypted. So in a traditional system, I've got all this data on a traditional database. And sometimes I'm going to send you an invoice, say, or a purchase order, or a RFP, or a master service agreement, or something where the information in that, it's really important that you and I both agree on the price, that we both agree that you received that invoice and that that you accepted it and it's got the right numbers in it, and I'm going to get paid, and that it followed the right rules. That if maybe I live in a area where there's a regulation that says I can't charge you more than X. Well, if I did charge you more than X, then there should have been something that prevented that work step from happening or from completing. All of these things are easy enough on a single machine, but when you have multiple machines run by different companies, you have to have some integration layer, some integration bus. And we've known how to do that for decades and decades. I've been out there for 32 years, and it was there when I got there. So it's an old pattern. And again, you can either primary one of the company's systems, but that gives them a lot of control over you, and you have to punch into their firewall, and it's just not a good security pattern. Or you set up an integration layer like an MQ series or something, but then and this is what we've been doing for years, where that thing is sort of the traffic cop to say, we're all going to subscribe to this thing, this new machine, and we're going to keep an eye on it and use it to say, well, this thing has to happen before that thing, and my record here is verifiably identical to your record there, that sort of thing. If you could put it all on a blockchain, and you didn't have to worry about the fact that there are people then who could hack somebody's node and get access to that information, or it's on a public blockchain where everybody can see it, then that would be conceptually easier, but you run into those, that digital news colony problem. So instead, what we do is we put a pointer, effectively a hash or a proof, on that middleware layer, that integration bus, and we use that to we keep the data in our respective databases, and we use that other machine to be sure that we have the right data without putting the data on it. I hope that makes sense. Dustin, what do you think? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm tracking you. Yeah.
Okay. Important. So, this is a different way of thinking. The first way of thinking is, and the way most people think about blockchains, is single source of truth. You hear this a lot, especially in enterprise blockchains. Single source of truth. We all need to be on the same page. Well, that's true. It would be nice to be on the same page, but most companies don't want to hand over their internal data to a big shared database that all those other companies have access to. Even your partners can someday become your competitors. You kind of want to watch that. So we've been able to do that for years. Didn't need blockchain for that. There was the reasons why we didn't do it, or it was hard to do, had to do with humans and the ways companies want to work together, not about the technology really at all. The advent of blockchain just gave enough hype to make a few projects like Walmart's Food Trust and TradeLens and some others sort of sexy enough for companies to say, really what was happening, I think, is, hey, put your data on this shared database. We call it a blockchain, so you don't have to worry about it. It's magically secure, which is not true. But the big punchline is, hey, grower or food person, put your data on this thing, and we'll let you continue to work with Walmart, which presumably that's important to them, and we'll put you on stage in Vegas with the CEO of IBM, right? And oh, that's interesting. So, but once the bloom goes off that rose, you start to see defections, just like you would if you'd just done that on a normal database. So I tend to call private blockchains shared databases, because that's what they are. And there are uses for them, but just not the ones that we've been selling. So instead, the other way of thinking about blockchain thinking about the problem is share a common frame of reference. We don't put all the data in a big honeypot and call it a single source of truth. We all have our own truth, but we have this join layer that basically is just a bag of proofs that prove that we have consistency and that we maintain consistency and that enforce consistency as we go through a set of work steps, right? From a proposal to a master service agreement to a purchase order to inventory control to invoicing to final payment and settlement. As an example, there's lots of different workflows. But we can enforce rules along the way. You have to do this step this way. You have to have done this before this other thing. And you can use this middleware layer. And today, this is the real change is today, we don't need to set those up every single time. There's a state machine out there called the public blockchain or the multiple public blockchains. I'm an advocate for Ethereum. I think that's a pretty good candidate for the kind of state machine we need. Others could decide other things. And that's the nice thing about creating an industry standard like the Baseline Protocol, is that it doesn't stipulate any particular blockchain. It just says you need a common frame of reference with these attributes. It needs to be always on. It has to be tamper resistant. It has to, basically, it has to be decentralized enough that it can't become controlled by a group of people and lock you out of transactions. These are the requirements for the standard. And that does look like Ethereum, but it could look like other blockchains too, theoretically. So if you have one of those, then you can drop proofs and onto that in such a way that there's nothing to see there. It looks like noise. It sounds like a metronome. It's just not, there's no information lost or very little. Just the fact that people are dropping proofs, but beyond that, you're not giving away anything about your business or your relationships or how you're working with other companies. And in that way, but if you and I are in on the secret of what this proof means, then it proves that you and I have the same information. That's useful. And we can drop that proof into the next work step and force the rules that were embodied in this fancy hash, this proof, so on that next work step, it won't complete unless it followed the rules of the previous work step. All right, that's the really boring, super boring version of what Baseline Protocol is all about. Do we have any questions yet, Dustin?
There has not been a ton yet. One question by Sabir was, compare the data signatures for equality rather than data itself.
Compare the data signatures for equality rather than the data itself. Compare so the signatures, essentially compare the data for equality rather than data set. Yes, okay. So the question mark was the part that I thought it was suggesting that. You're effectively, it's a proof of consistency. That's the way I like to put it. I'm proving that some set of machines have some consistent information without telling that the blockchain anything about what that data is, and we do that under zero knowledge in a way so that when you drop those proofs, there's nobody can figure out that was you. You've seen an increase of interest by companies and organizations to actually use smart contracts. Or are they still watching from the sidelines? And do you reckon this will increase more when Chainlink releases enterprise-friendly tech like Deco? I think, yes. So in the Baseline Protocol, there are two smart contracts. One's a verifier contract. One's called a shield contract. But importantly, it's the same smart contracts over and over and over again. if you have smart contracts with different attributes, then you can point an AI at that blockchain and start getting some pretty interesting classifiers about who's doing what, right? And in the world of AI, you have to think about what information exhaust are you dropping onto a common publicly accessible ledger, and what would a person with an AI do with that? And so you can have blockchains like that really just do one thing, like Zcash, right? So Zcash, it's somebody gave somebody something. Then the next record is somebody gave somebody something. And the next record is somebody gave somebody something. It's the sameness over and over and over again. You can't really get anything off that. There's no information dropped, right? Just other than the fact that people are making transactions somewhere. And if you throw some chaff in there, even that goes away, because you can't really be sure which ones are actually, real transactions. So that's really good security. But if you want to do smart contracts, and say you want to build in some business logic into that smart contract, that itself can, the bytecode of that can be compiled, and somebody can figure out from the attributes of that agreement, that smart contract, that business logic, something about your business. You'd say, oh yeah, well that clearly, that has clearly the markings of this particular company's workflow. And I've worked with them before, so I've recorded that, and now I see them using that all over the place with other people. Wait a minute, they're working with other people. Damn them, right? So that's again, what you put on a public blockchain or a private blockchain can come back and bite you. And security officers in big companies and smaller companies know this, so they're a little concerned about putting in the clear smart contracts on blockchains. But again, instead what you can do, and this is where Chainlink still is super relevant, is you can instead do what the Baseline Protocol prescribes, which is build your logic into zero knowledge circuits off chain, and then run those and drop those proofs onto the public blockchain. Dropping the proofs on the public blockchain gives you that strong tamper resistance to say, this proof has not been altered. Nobody's playing shenanigans. If I'm out of sync with that proof, I know that I'm out of sync with the other counterparty. It's not like I'm pretty sure nobody's gone in and changed that proof. And that's really the very simple and, again, boring way that blockchain adds a huge amount of value, but in a very narrow way, just using it to confer tamper resistance on this workflow. And then, but then oracles come back into play, because if I say, well, part of this workflow is it needs to go do a stock lookup or a weather lookup or any kind of data that needs to change. If company A's computer executes that function and looks up that information, company B's computer does the same thing, they're going to get different inputs. And that's going to fail. The proof is not going to be able to be dropped because they got different outputs, right? So that's non-determinism. And they're part of non-determinism. And so in that way, or a big marketplace of common data that can assure me that the input I'm using into these different, it's not on the blockchain itself, but in the different systems of record are getting the same inputs, the same parameters are going in. And that's where Chainlink can be really valuable in a Baseline Protocol framework. I see a question. What are the use cases that you're working on right now that make use of Baseline? And I'll tell you the most obvious one. There's a big horizontal one that says, this is the way I put it. If I got in an elevator with a CEO and I said, hey, how much are you spending and losing when screw ups happen between you and your counterparties, your partners and your suppliers and your buyers? And we'll start to talk about things like your contra account that you're maintaining for getting sued because something went wrong. Your the fact that you just had to make good $1 million in make good to a company that that disputed something you did. Maybe you thought that you had 2 weeks to put something on somebody's dock, and their record said that it had to show up today, and they're more powerful than you. And they say, "Hey, I don't care what your record says. I need that stuff on my docks by tomorrow, or you don't have to work with us anymore." Those are horrible, multi-million dollars sometimes, just huge make good errors, and other dispute issues. And so the CEO is going to say, "Yeah, that's a real problem." And I'll say, "Well, you need to baseline your systems with your customer or with your partners," and that'll get me a meeting with their CIO. But if I say, and this is the business that we're working on, if you baseline your invoices, and don't worry about what that means for a minute, I'll tell you about that later, or I'll tell your CIO, I'll buy your invoices from you for a ridiculously low discount rate, because I'm much more confident that those invoices are going to get paid, because there won't be disputes, because I know for sure that the buyer and the supplier, there's still reasons why things won't get paid, like the company goes out of business or something, but at least I can remove or radically reduce dispute risk. I'll buy them from you for a much lower price, and I'm going to DeFi that. That's an interesting join between traditional IT and this use of the blockchain as a consistency layer, and new financing forms like DeFi. And that, I think that's quite exciting. And I think I'll get a ride all the way to the top of the elevator with that CEO. If I said, "Hey, I'm going to buy your invoices so you can have your money immediately. And now I worry about how long it takes your customer to pay me. And I'm willing to take on that risk because I'm not having to worry about consistency between you and your customer." I like that story. I also like the banking story that says, well, the customer's bank won't pay me until it knows for sure that I paid the supplier. Well, imagine banks are baselined and can drop that confirmation proof again onto the public blockchain. All they have to do is subscribe to it, pick it up, and go, "Oh, yep, I can pay them now." Right? That's much more efficient than the way we have to do it today. Dustin, does that make sense to you?
It does. Changing the way factoring works and the exposure to the businesses has to be massive, right? And even the exposure for banks, I could definitely see the impact and the liquidity that both businesses and other suppliers will be able to get to have more velocity of capital for just more output. It seems extremely efficient.
Yep. So it's all about it's the dialectic here is we need transparency, but we don't want transparency. Right? I want people who need to know where the food, that there's, if I need to know that there's something wrong in the food supply, I need the people that need to know that. And then they need to know quickly and they need to know easily. And we call that transparency. But I'm pretty sure we don't want just anybody to know where all the food is and in what state it is. And I'm pretty sure I don't want you to know what the price I charged my wholesaler, what the wholesaler gave me. Maybe they have a discount rate for me that is different from somebody else. And that's the way business works. And I'm pretty sure it's going to stay working that way because humans. And, I don't think we're going to live in a world, as long as we have humans, that is okay with just everybody knowing everything about everybody else. And that would be true, complete transparency. We don't really want that. And blockchains are really bad at doing anything but that. So, a lot of what has prevented adoption in businesses that really have to be serious about information security is that the blockchains like to spread, as a pattern, they like to spread things out. Anybody with a node. So even in a private blockchain, again, it's not a good decision to say, well, I don't like public blockchain, so I'll use private blockchain. If you don't like public blockchain, don't use private blockchain, use a database, do things properly. Because the stupidest administrator in your blockchain, in your private blockchain network is going to get, with the worst security protocols, are going to get hacked and negate the whole reason why you went to a private blockchain. And CISOs should understand that, right? Yeah. Shared databases, sure. Yeah. There's lots of reasons for me to have a shared database. But you need to, but putting it in those terms helps business leaders understand that they're not working with some kind of magical machine that's going to keep their information, beautifully transparent and perfectly safe. It might make it more tamper resistant, but it doesn't make it more surveillance resistant. And that's usually what companies think of when they think of information security. They don't want to have a data breach. A private blockchain gives you a lot of opportunity to get data breaches. Way beyond, if you're like, oh, we get data breaches on our private databases. I'm like, yeah, you do, because you did something stupid. But the answer to that is not put it on a blockchain. You just increase the problem. The answer is get your act together and manage your information systems correctly. But yeah, so that's I'm rambling at this point. Let's see. A few seconds ago, maybe answered, are the proofs checked by nodes in a Chainlink? Yeah, okay. So the Chainlink has a huge role to play. The proofs can be deposited on any blockchain that meets the standard. So you can go to baseline-protocol.org and check out the standard that's in development. The GitHub repos are there, and you can get involved. You can click on the Slack link and talk to the community. There's about 1,000 people in the channel right now. And a lot of big companies, Ernst & Young, Microsoft, Consensus, SAP has been in all the standards meetings for the last several months. So yeah, we've got a lot of folks in there, Splunk, Accenture, and many others. So as that standard evolves, the standard requires certain things, but it does not require that you put it on a particular blockchain. There's a blockchain. It's not really the way you'd think of a blockchain. There's a bunch of nodes that are being set up called Baseledger. And Baseledger is sort of basically an L2 anchored to the Ethereum mainnet. And what I like about Baseledger, as it should be released pretty soon to testnet and then to full use later this year, early next. Baseledger is effectively just a dedicated system, distributed, decentralized system for dropping proofs. So it's a big bag of proofs, and that's all it does. It's very cheap, and then it anchors those proofs, rolls them up to the Ethereum mainnet, so that you get that Ethereum mainnet tamper resistance without dealing with gas or with a lot of cost. And in fact, I just learned this week that they use a token called Unibright UBT to pay for the transactions. But if UBT goes up or down, it doesn't matter. The cost in real terms to put a proof on that layer does not change unless governance sets a new price. So this is really important for companies. They don't want to subject their internal IT systems to fluctuating token or crypto prices. So the way they've set it up is, I guess, sort of like Gnosis. You're not having fluctuations in the cost of running an opcode on it, and the opcodes are very limited. It doesn't really do any trading. It doesn't do any. It can't run an exchange or anything like that. It doesn't have token capability. It's just proofs. It's Merkle trees full of proofs. Is Baseledger using Arbitrum? No. Again, Baseledger is a pretty simple kind of idea, right? And so it's an L2, but it doesn't trade in tokens. I mean, and I think I know this. So the UBT token that they are using to power transactions. I should say you can pay in fiat through something like Infura ITX, and it'll convert through UBT, but the company doesn't even deal with that. They don't have to hold UBT or anything like that. They're just using that as a clearance mechanism for handling the transaction cost and rewarding the node holders and all that. But the UBT stays on the Ethereum mainnet as an ERC20. What is Baseline doing to bring enterprise businesses into the ecosystem? Well, I think the most important thing that Baseline Protocol is doing to bring enterprises into the ecosystem is remove the elephants in the room about why enterprises should be involved in the ecosystem. Again, a sensible CIO, CTO, CISO looking at anybody saying, "Hey, put your, let's get you on the blockchain." They've just got really good reasons why they don't want to do that, and they're not going to change. They're sensible reasons. Again, I don't care what kind of company you are. If you're dealing with personal PII, personal information, you don't put it on a blockchain. Don't put it on IPFS. I mean, it's just you're violating laws and lots of bad things. It's not appropriate for that to be on something that can be discoverable and either hackable or just plain old out there for anybody to see. When that stops, when everybody can see everything of everybody else's, then we're okay. But Baseline Protocol says, yeah, no, you don't have to do it that way. You can use the blockchain, the public blockchain, in a sensible, highly secure information security framework that isn't going to get you fired. And that helps right there in getting enterprises more involved. I mean, whenever I was talking to an enterprise yesterday, a CEO of an enterprise, and I led off by saying, let's not talk about blockchain. Let's talk about data sync between your company and your counterparties, your partners, and what goes wrong, and how we can fix it with lower cost, with a less balkanized, brittle, bespoke way than we used to do when we had to throw up integration buses all over the place. And that's a story that, again, it's just a sensible story. It just makes sense to people. Is the hardest part of my job is having to say the word blockchain from time to time and not having people get this knee-jerk reaction of going, "Oh, I don't want to put my data on a blockchain." I'm like, we're not asking you to. Don't do that. But you can use it as middleware pretty effectively, and for lower TCO. Anybody that sells to enterprises will know. Just tell them about total cost of ownership, and you're good. So changing from a capital expense of having to set up and run dedicated machines that integrate you and your consortium or your partners, and then having to do it again for a different group and another one for a different group, just over and over again. It's just it makes system integrators very rich, but it doesn't. It's not efficient, and it makes really hard to make different workflows work together. And say I've got this workflow I'm a tire manufacturer, and I've got a workflow for my rubber supply chain. But I'm also part of an automotive supply chain. I got to get my tires to somebody that makes cars. And those two workflows were developed by different groups at different times, different places, different contexts. I've got a real integration problem there. So I've got an integration problem on top of an integration problem on top of another integration problem. And now we have to argue about whose common frame of reference we're going to use. Well, if we all use the public blockchain as that integration layer, then I can knit together my workflow step number 33 with your work step 22, as long as they have any compatibility, right? Like, they're dealing with the same data and the same schema. And I can do that, and I can use those proofs to control flow between those two different workflows. So you get a lot more flexibility, a lot more plasticity with using a public blockchain. Somebody's Antti Katunen is asking, what are the real world use cases you're excited for? And I will say, lower cost of capital for cash management. So companies go out of business mainly because they run out of cash. And often a big contributor to that is your customer didn't pay you on time. If we can, my company will be saying, and I think this will proliferate. Hey, if you're baselined, I'm less worried that you're not going to get paid. I'll pay you right now. I'll pay you immediately, and I'll pay your whole bill, or minus my fee. I'll pay your whole bill. You got $1 million bill. I'll pay you $999,000 and change, and all up front right now. I'm not going to give you some now and a little more later. That's kind of the factoring business. I'm going to give it to you all now, And now I will worry about collecting from your customer. Because I'm not worried about your defrauding me, because it would be very hard for you to do that within a baseline contract context. And I'm not worried about I'm a lot less worried about your customer not paying me. You imagine that's, you get to be big enough with that kind of operation. And you can have whole sector risks where, a sector just has trouble, like what we saw in COVID. And if you're dealing with if you've got $1 trillion pot of money serving all of that, it's a bad day for the financier. But at least the suppliers that were going to go out of business don't have to go out of business. They can keep on buying stuff for their next load of whatever they're making for their customer. And that's usually a problem, right? Especially in manufacturing, the suppliers at the whipsaw back end of this erratic cash flow stream. And they have to wait to cover to make some, to buy the materials that they use to make their thing. They have to wait for their customer to pay them, who's waiting for their customer to pay them, who's waiting for their customer to pay them. And that's one of the banes of the manufacturing supply chain industry. So if we can say, no, everybody gets paid right now, don't worry about it. And if your customer doesn't pay, it's my problem. You can go ahead and spend that money. I have no recourse to get a claw it back from you. Think about that. I mean, think about when we have this bad day coming of a world where inversions happen and inflation and other things. It'd be really nice if capital kept flowing during that time. And if you have large funds, they're able to, because of baselining, have more confidence in low enough discount rates that companies just use that for everything. Then capital keeps flowing, even in the bad times. And it might be a bad time for, it might be trouble for that fund, but if the fund is sufficiently diversified across sectors, unless it's a complete meltdown of everything, they'll be able to handle it. Dustin, what else have we got?
So Ryan Smith just asked how far away until we get Baseline set up live between two companies or a consortium?
Great question, Ryan. The answer is now. The first, so there's a company called Provide Services. Yeah. You can find them. They're one of the really prolific contributors to the Baseline protocol. There's a guy there named Kyle Thomas who's pretty smart and has kind of bet the farm on baselining, and they have a couple of really big customers, Coca-Cola, Coke One North America, and it was really brave company. They came out and early and said they're working on this project, and they said it before they finished the project, which is not typical for enterprises. I find that very impressive. And also ServiceNow, and I've seen a list of their pipeline. It's a pretty impressive pipeline. So these companies are already baselining today. Buyers and suppliers in the bottling, Coke One North America, Bottling Harbor. They're already going into. I think they're going into production either imminently or now, and they. So people are already doing it, but around about I think in this quarter, or early next quarter, you'll see announcements about the live test net for Baseledger, which will just make it a lot easier for anybody to baseline. The thing about a standard is that if you have competent developers and architects in your company today, you could build a production version of a baseline implementation. You don't have to wait for anybody to do anything. I mean, it's the pattern is obvious, and you just need to read the specification, which is the draft standard has been written, and now it's going through review to be officially made into a standard by OASIS, and it'll be officially then pushed to probably ISO in the new year. And at that point, enterprises can say, okay, yeah, it's good. It's an ISO standard. I can utilize it. But then there's lots of tools and things to make it easy for a typical developer to get going fast and using, a compliant system for that, and Provide has, I think, the first one of those. So the Provide stack looks pretty good. We actually just reviewed their work, and it looked pretty good to us. So that's moving along, and I think imminently you'll be able to just kind of go npm and throw up basically enable your system to be baselined. Whether you're a production, you're a company with a product like say an Intuit with QuickBooks, or an SAP, or Microsoft Dynamics, or SQL Server, you could, Mongo, you could just basically make your product baseline compatible out of the box. Or you could be a solution provider and say, hey, company XYZ, hey, this consortium, let's baseline. It's a lot better pattern than anything we were talking about before. And so, yeah, I think companies like Provide are already stealing business from big solutions vendors, customers, they're getting business from the customers of big solutions vendors, because those big solutions vendors don't necessarily yet know how to baseline, which means that they're going to have to learn fast.
So I guess just another follow-on question that a lot of people are asking, and you just teed up on this about integrating into different both ERP and SAP CRM systems. How do you envision Baseline interacting with both the ERP and CRM systems in the future once they are baselined?
Yeah, you won't even know you're dealing with it. You just won't have to run integrations anymore. You just, you'll just be able to make a call within your ERP system, and it'll drop that proof onto either whatever ledger or layer you want to drop it onto, whether it's base ledger or some other thing that comes along. And as long as those proofs are addressable, it doesn't have to go on one particular ledger, as long as you can address them, right? So if you want to do integrations, I dropped my proofs on this ledger. Well, it's fine. I can go find it, as long as I can get to it. So in that way, I hate this phrase blockchain agnostic, but in a way that it's kind of like DIDs. You don't have to put your identifiers on any particular blockchain, but you should anchor them to a public blockchain so that you get that permanence and tamper resistance. But you don't have to put them on any particular one. But I will say that I like base ledger, and I'll say 4 out of 5 dentists choose base ledger for their patient. I think base ledger is a good way of doing it. If there are others that come in the future, that's great. That's why it's a standard and not a platform, right? Because you can we don't have vendor lock-in. That's a good thing for enterprises. Yeah.
Always good. I hate being bound. Felicia.
Let me really quick, before I see the timer, let me very quickly make a plug. A lot of news about all this stuff will be coming out at ETH Atlanta event on October 1st and 2nd and 3rd. It's a hackathon. You can get, there are prizes, and you can do all sorts of cool baseline-y stuff. I know that that there's a lot of that event will be about baseline, or the baseline protocol. Or baselining. I like to use the verb. It's not a brand. It's not a product. It's not a token. It's not a scheme. It's just a way of doing things. And so I think what we want to make this a thing, right? We say, oh yeah, are you baselining? Of course, I'm baselining. Who wouldn't be baselining, right? Is that purchase order baseline? I need it to be baseline. I'm not confident in that purchase order unless it's baselined. So it's a term of art.
I like it, baselining. Since you're plugging the event, what are some of the prizes that people can win at ETH Atlanta if they participate?
I don't know that I'm ready to say the number, but I know that Consensus is backing it. I think I know of a number of companies that I know are sponsoring, but I don't know that I'm at liberty to say which ones they are yet. So I'll probably say it's safe and not mention them. But there's a bunch of us, and yeah, there'll be pretty big cash prizes. Keep an eye on ethatlanta.com, I think, ethatl.com for that. And also, but we'll probably be making some announcements of that from our company at that time as well.
Fantastic. Well, we got about 30 seconds left. Make sure you follow John on Twitter. Any other things you would like to highlight before we wrap up?
I guess just to say this is the time. We've been working on the standard for a long time. It was Ernst & Young, Microsoft, and Consensus at the beginning, and now there's tons and tons of companies. And it's gone up and down as all standards do in terms of intensity of effort. But now it's getting to that point where you can make money today on it. And say, if you're an enterprise, you can, or a company, you can save money. The question is, are you seeing an increase in enterprises approaching you? Yes. And I think that, the big integrators like the Infosys and Wipros and TCSs of the world are now starting to see that if they don't get in front of this, they're going to start losing money to other people.
Fantastic. Well, John, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate the back and forth. Again, follow John Wolpert on Twitter. He has a lot of amazing content all the time, both about Baseline and just broader news that you should be paying attention to. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to see you, Dustin.
Nice
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.